Eleanor Grayson's life was perfect until Victor's heart stopped, leaving her a widow drowning in wealth and solitude atop Marble Cove's cliffs. Enter Nathan Caldwell, the doctor who couldn't save her husband, but now offers late-night solace that feels too intimate to trust. Then there's Sophie Marwood, the bold designer whose touch lingers beyond the blueprints, awakening desires Eleanor thought were dead. At first, their attention feels like salvation, until a shadowy note slips under her door. Not everyone is who they seem. As jealousy festers and secrets spill, a lawsuit in Nathan's past, a photo linking Sophie to Victor, the trio's dance of passion spirals toward chaos. A priceless necklace vanishes, accusations fly, and a stormy showdown ends in blood. In the wreckage, Eleanor must confront who truly loved her and who killed for her. Before we continue, friends, I kindly ask you to subscribe to my channel. It only takes a second for you, but for me, it's an extra motivation to keep creating videos. I'd also really appreciate a comment. Thank you for your support, and now let's continue with the story. The wind tore at the cliffs of Marble Cove, California, a wild, keening howl that seemed to claw at the secrets buried deep in the earth. The Grayson estate clung to that jagged edge, its white stucco walls shimmering faintly beneath a sky bruised purple and gray by the fading October light. Inside, Eleanor Grayson lingered in her late husband's study, her fingertips brushing the cool, polished mahogany of his desk. A desk where Victor had once sat, his broad hands shuffling papers, his voice a steady murmur as he planned routes for ships that spanned oceans. At 55, she still carried the grace that had once silenced rooms, her auburn hair streaked with silver and gathered loosely at her nape, but her hazel eyes bore shadows that hadn't been there 6 months ago. Victor's heart had betrayed him, stopping abruptly one humid June evening, and with it, her world had gone quiet, too quiet. The mansion, sprawling and regal against the Pacific's restless churn, felt less like a home now and more like a mausoleum, its vast rooms echoing with the life she'd lost. Tonight, though, something trembled in the air, a restless hum that prickled her skin and set her nerves alight. She stood by the window, gazing out at the ocean's black expanse, waves slamming the rocks below with a fury that mirrored the ache twisting in her chest. Victor's absence was a weight she couldn't shake. She saw him still, his stern jaw softened by a rare smile as they danced at some long-ago gala, his calloused fingers brushing her cheek in the dark. Those memories clung to her, tender and suffocating, and yet here she was alone, tracing the edges of a life that no longer fit. The grandfather clock in the hall told 9, its deep resonance vibrating through the stillness, pulling her from her reverie. Headlights pierced the dusk, carving a path up the winding drive, and her breath caught as a silver sedan eased to a halt. Dr. Nathan Caldwell stepped out, his silhouette sharp against the gloaming, dark hair tousled by the wind, a leather satchel slung over one shoulder. He'd been Victor's cardiologist, the man who'd stood over her husband's still form, his hands steady even as hers shook. Now he was something more, a presence that tugged at the edges of her solitude. The doorbell's soft chime cut through the mansion's hush, startling her. She smoothed her silk blouse, the fabric cool against her palms, and descended the grand staircase, each step a quiet clack of heels on marble that echoed her heartbeat. When she opened the door, Nathan's smile washed over her, warm, disarming, the corners of his blue eyes crinkling with a kindness that felt almost too deliberate. "Evening, Eleanor," he said, his voice smooth and rich, like the bourbon Victor used to sip. "Thought I'd make sure you're not fading into these walls." Her laugh slipped out, fragile and bright, a sound that startled her as she waved him inside. He carried the faint scent of cedar and something sharper, antiseptic perhaps, a whisper of the hospital corridors he ruled by day. They settled in the parlor, its velvet drapes swallowing the light, the unlit fireplace a silent monument to colder nights with Victor. Nathan set his satchel down, producing a bottle of Pinot Noir with a flourish. "A little something to warm the place up," he said, his grin teasing, though his gaze lingered on her a beat too long, searching. Before she could respond, the front door creaked open again, unbidden, and a chill raced down her spine, tightening her throat. Sophie Marwood stepped across the threshold, her boots scuffing the pristine floor, her presence a jolt of color against the mansion's muted tones. Jet-black hair spilled over her leather jacket in reckless waves, and her green eyes glinted with a feline sharpness that seemed to see straight through the room. At 38, she radiated a restless vitality that made Eleanor's pulse stutter, youthful, bold. A stark contrast to Victor's measured calm. "Didn't mean to barge in," Sophie said, her voice a low, playful drawl as she dangled a set of keys between her fingers. "You left these at the showroom, Eleanor. Figured I'd save you the trip, and maybe see how my chaos is settling into your castle." She was the designer Eleanor had hired on a whim, her wild ideas, blood-red walls, jagged sculptures, pushing against the mansion's staid bones. Sophie's gaze flicked to Nathan, a smirk tugging at her lips. "Dr. Caldwell didn't peg you for the house call type." Nathan's smile didn't waver, but a shadow flitted across his face, brief, dark, gone before Eleanor could pin it down. "Just keeping an eye on a friend," he said, lifting his glass in a lazy salute. "Some of us don't clock out at 5. Sophie's laugh was sharp, almost a challenge, as she dropped onto the sofa, her legs crossing with a grace that drew Eleanor's eye despite herself. "Funny how duty always finds you at the good table." The air thickened, charged with something Eleanor couldn't name. Resentment, maybe, or recognition. Her fingers tightened around her wineglass, the cool stem grounding her as she watched them spar. These two weren't strangers. The weight of their words hinted at a past she hadn't been privy to, and it stirred a flicker of unease beneath her ribs. The evening unfolded in a haze of wine and words. Nathan spun stories of his med school days, his charm weaving a spell that even Sophie couldn't fully resist, though her quips cut through his polish like a blade. She countered with tales of her own, sketching in Parisian cafes, charming a Milanese art dealer into a discount. Her voice painting a life of reckless freedom Victor would have frowned upon. Eleanor drank it in, her loneliness softening with each glass, her skin warming under Sophie's gaze. Once, as Sophie reached for the bottle, her fingers grazed Eleanor's wrist. A slow, deliberate brush that sent a shiver racing up her arm. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the room shrank to just the two of them. Sophie's lips parting as if to say something, then curving into a knowing smile. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" she murmured, her tone soft but laced with something deeper, something that left Eleanor's breath uneven. Nathan's chair creaked as he shifted, his presence pulling her back. She glanced at him, catching a hardness in his jaw, a glint in his eyes that wasn't there before, like a man who just remembered a debt unpaid. He poured another round, his movements precise, but his voice dipped lower as he said, "Careful, Sophie. Some surprises cut both ways." The words hung there, cryptic, heavy, and Eleanor's stomach twisted, though she couldn't say why. She rose to fetch a shawl, the chill seeping through her blouse more than the room's draft. As she climbed the stairs, their voices floated up, hushed, jagged, a rhythm that prickled her scalp. "You don't get to play that card," Sophie hissed, too low to catch more, and Nathan's reply was a rumble lost to the wind. When she returned, the parlor was a tableau of strained silence. Sophie by the cold hearth, arms folded tight, Nathan sprawled against the sofa, his ease a mask that didn't fit. "Is something wrong?" Eleanor asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Sophie's smile flashed, brittle and quick. "Just old ghosts rattling their chains. Nothing new." Nathan's chuckle was a low rasp, his eyes fixed on Sophie. "Ancient history," he said, but the way he lingered on ancient, like a man tasting a lie, sent a cold thread snaking down her spine. Before she could press, a sharp thud jolted the room, a heavy rap against the front door that swallowed the storm's roar. Her heart lurched, hammering against her ribs as she crossed to the entryway, the floor icy beneath her feet. Through the peephole only shadows danced, cypress branches bending in the gale, no figure in sight. She opened the door, the wind snatching at her hair, and spotted a small envelope pinned beneath a rough stone. Her name sprawled across it in uneven ink, jagged as a wound. She tore it open, the paper crisp against her trembling fingers, and read the typed words. Not everyone is who they seem. Back in the parlor, she held it up, her voice quaking as the message spilled out. Nathan's glass froze midair, his knuckles whitening around the stem. Sophie's eyes flared wide, then sharpened, darting to Nathan like an accusation. "What's that supposed to mean?" she snapped, her bravado cracking at the edges. Nathan set his drink down, slow and deliberate, but his calm frayed as he spoke. "Some small-town busybody stirring the pot. Happens when you've got money and a big house." His dismissal rang thin, and Sophie's scoff sliced through it. "Or maybe it's not a game," she said, her stare pinning him. "Maybe someone's watching closer than you think." Eleanor's grip tightened on the note, her mind a storm of its own. Victor's ghost loomed behind her. His steady hands, his quiet nights, clashing with the chaos Nathan and Sophie brought. They'd slipped into her life like a lifeline, pulling her from the void, but now her chest ached with doubt, sharp and unfamiliar. The mansion's shadows stretched, curling around her like tendrils, and the ocean's roar outside felt like a warning she couldn't decipher. She looked at Nathan, his mask slipping just enough to hint at something buried, then at Sophie, whose gaze held a promise she didn't understand. Who were they, beneath the charm and the fire, and what had she invited into her sanctuary? The night pressed in, dark and unyielding, and she knew the answer was coming, whether she wanted it or not. The storm raged against Marble Cove, rain hammering the Grayson Estate's windows with a ferocity that rattled the panes. Inside the parlor, Eleanor stood rigid, the cryptic note trembling in her grip, its stark words a cold weight against her chest. The fire she'd kindled spat embers onto the hearth, casting jagged shadows across Nathan's sharp features as he lounged against the sofa, twirling his wineglass with a forced nonchalance. Sophie prowled near the flames, her boots scraping the rug, her restless stride cutting through the room's stifling hush. Beyond the walls, the Pacific churned, its roar a relentless drumbeat that pulsed in Eleanor's ears. She dropped the note onto the coffee table, its edges curling in the heat, and sank into an armchair, the damp silk of her blouse clinging to her shoulders where the storm's breath had seeped through the door. Nathan's voice sliced the silence, low and clipped. "Small towns breed small minds. It's probably just some local stirring trouble." His fingers tightened around the glass, a faint crackle of strain beneath his casual tone. Sophie spun toward him, her green eyes flashing. "You're kidding, right? Someone's out there in that mess, leaving threats, and you call it trouble?" She gestured sharply at the window, rain slashing the glass like knives. Eleanor's stomach knotted. Not at the words, but at the way Nathan's jaw ticked, a fleeting shadow crossing his face before he smoothed it away. She pressed her palms against her thighs, the fabric cool and slick, grounding her as the room tilted with unspoken currents. "It's got my name on it," she said, her voice a thin thread against the storm's howl. "They didn't pick this house by chance." Sophie snatched the note, holding it to the firelight, her brow creasing as she studied it. "No mistakes. Clean, precise," she muttered, tossing it back down. She caught Eleanor's gaze, her expression softening, a whisper of warmth breaking through her edge. "You shouldn't have to deal with this." The words brushed against Eleanor like a touch, stirring a memory of Sophie's fingers grazing her wrist the night before. A spark she couldn't shake. Nathan stood, crossing to the window with a predator's grace, his reflection a dark twin in the rain-streaked glass. Could be anyone in Marble Cove. Plenty of folks would claw at your fortune given half a chance. His smile was thin, cutting, as he turned back. Or maybe it's someone who knows the layout. His eyes flicked to Sophie, sharp and probing, and Eleanor's breath caught at the accusation buried in his tone. Sophie bristled, her fists clenching. "If I wanted to mess with her, I'd do it face to face, not with some coward's scribble." The air snapped taut, their history a live wire Eleanor could almost touch. Before she could speak, 3 sharp knocks pounded the front door, loud enough to jolt her heart into her throat. Nathan moved first, striding to the entryway with a speed that belied his calm, his hand brushing his satchel as if checking for something hidden. Sophie followed, her boots a rapid echo, and Eleanor trailed behind, her pulse hammering against her ribs. Nathan yanked the door open, revealing only the storm's chaos. Rain slicing sideways, cypress branches thrashing like skeletal hands. "Nothing," he said, but his voice was too flat, his shoulders squared as if braced for a fight. Sophie stepped onto the stoop, the wind whipping her hair into a wild tangle, and crouched, her fingers brushing the wet stone. She straightened, a silver bracelet glinting in her palm, its delicate chain swaying with tiny charms. A ship, a heart, a star engraved with a faint V. "Recognize this?" she asked, her eyes locking on Eleanor's. Eleanor's knees buckled, and she gripped the doorframe, the cold stone biting her skin. The V triggered a flash Victor's voice, rough with pride, as he clasped a similar bracelet around her wrist years ago, whispering, "My guiding star, from the Valor's first voyage." That piece was long lost, but this one, its ship charm etched with Valor in tiny script, felt like a ghost clawing its way back. "It's not mine," she said, the words tasting sharp and false, her hands trembling as she took it from Sophie. Nathan stepped closer, his fingers brushing hers as he examined it, his touch lingering a beat too long. "Junk," he said, but his voice dipped, and his thumb traced the V with a familiarity that made Eleanor's skin crawl. He handed it back, his eyes narrowing as they met hers, dark, unreadable, a man who'd seen that ship before. A crash erupted upstairs, a heavy thud that shook the chandelier's crystals into a frantic dance. Eleanor's head jerked up, her breath a ragged gasp. Nathan bolted for the stairs, his satchel slapping against his hip, and Sophie grabbed Eleanor's arm, her grip tight and warm. "Stick with me," she hissed, her breath hot against Eleanor's ear as they followed. "He's too quick to run toward trouble." Her words carried a barb, and Eleanor's chest tightened, caught between Sophie's urgency and Nathan's shadowed haste. They reached the study, the door banging open under Nathan's push. Books littered the floor, Victor's ledgers, their pages splayed like broken wings, and the desk chair lay toppled, its leather slashed. The window gaped wide, rain pooling on the hardwood, curtains whipping in the gale. Nathan crossed to shut it, his hands unsteady as he forced the latch, a sheen of sweat glinting on his brow despite the cold. "Storm must have blown it in," he said, but his tone rang hollow. Sophie knelt by a ledger, its cover stamped Grayson shipping Valor logs, the paper torn clean through, a dark smear, ink or something thicker, staining the edges. "This isn't weather," she said, holding up the page, the names Valor and Mariner's Hope scrawled in Victor's meticulous hand now marred by violence. Eleanor's vision blurred, the bracelet's weight searing her palm. Someone had been here, tearing into Victor's past, her past, and Nathan's quick glance at the ledger, his lips pressing into a thin line, hinted at a knowledge he wouldn't share. The storm's howl swallowed the room, the shadows curling tighter around them. Sophie rose, her stance fierce but her eyes darting to Eleanor with a flicker of something tender, while Nathan stood by the window, his calm fracturing, his hand hovering near his satchel as if ready to pull something free. The note's warning echoed in Eleanor's skull. Not everyone is who they seem, and the air thickened with questions she couldn't voice. Who had invaded her sanctuary, and why did the Valor, Victor's pride, his legacy, feel like the key? The night stretched on, the storm a relentless witness, and the truth loomed closer, sharp and unforgiving. Eleanor stood in the study's doorway, the silver bracelet dangling from her fingers, its Valor charm catching the faint glow of the firelight filtering up from the parlor below. The room was a battlefield of Victor's legacy. Ledgers splayed across the floor, their pages curling at the edges. The desk chair toppled with its leather slashed open like a wound. Rain pattered against the now-closed window, a restless rhythm that gnawed at her nerves, amplifying the unease coiling in her gut. Sophie knelt amid the chaos, her fingers tracing a torn page from the Valor logs, her green eyes narrowing as she deciphered its secrets. Nathan lingered near the sill, his silhouette taut, one hand brushing his satchel with a twitch that sent a shiver racing up Eleanor's spine. The air crackled, thick with questions she couldn't yet voice. Sophie rose, clutching the ledger, her voice sharp and insistent. This isn't just bookkeeping. Look, Valor, March 12th, 1750 crates, unmarked, delivered off record. And here, Mariner's Hope, August 19. Consignment rerouted, no customs log. It's all in code. Triangles, slashes, numbers that don't add up. She thrust the book into Eleanor's hands, the paper damp and heavy, Victor's meticulous script staring back at her. She remembered him hunched over these pages in the dead of night, his pen scratching furiously, his mutters about tight schedules brushing off her questions. One entry caught her eye. October 3rd, 200 units, shadow drop, VC cleared. The date, 2 days before his heart gave out, hit her like a punch, her breath hitching as she traced the initials. Victor Grayson or someone else? Her hands shook, the ledger a Pandora's box she'd never dared open until now. Nathan edged closer, peering over her shoulder, his breath a warm intrusion against her neck. Every shipping man has his tricks, he said, his tone smooth as glass. But his fingers lingered on the page, brushing Mariner's Hope with a familiarity that made her skin crawl. Off the book's deals keep the wheels turning. His casual dismissal rang hollow, and Eleanor pulled the ledger back, her pulse thudding in her ears. You talk like you've seen it firsthand, she said, her voice low but firm, testing the waters. His smirk flickered, a shadow crossing his blue eyes before he shrugged. I've stitched up enough dockhands to hear the stories. Rum runners, smugglers, the works. The words felt rehearsed, and Sophie's sharp laugh sliced through them. Stories, huh? You're too cozy with this for my taste, she said, crossing her arms, her stance a challenge. She stepped toward Eleanor, her voice softening, a thread of urgency weaving through it. He's brushing it off too fast. Look at him. Nathan's jaw tightened, his hand dipping into his pocket, then emerging empty, but the motion, quick, deliberate, lodged in Eleanor's mind like a warning flare. She wanted to demand what he knew, how Mariner's Hope fit into his past, but a metallic scrape from downstairs cut her off. A latch giving way, a door creaking open in the wind's restless grip. Sophie bolted for the landing, her boots a rapid tattoo on the hardwood, and Eleanor followed, the bracelet's chain biting into her palm, Nathan's shadow close behind. The grand staircase loomed ahead, the chandelier swaying faintly, its crystals glinting like teardrops in the dim light. The parlor door hung ajar, a puddle spreading across the marble where the rain had slipped inside. But it was the figure by the hearth that stopped them. A hunched shape in a dripping raincoat, water streaming from the hood. Eleanor's heart lurched as the figure turned, revealing Margaret Pierce's pinched face, her gray hair plastered to her scalp, her eyes gleaming with a mix of panic and glee. She clutched a camera, its lens a cold, unblinking stare. Margaret! Eleanor's voice cracked, her grip tightening on the ledger until the edges bit into her skin. The neighbor straightened, her raincoat shedding rivulets onto the rug. Heard noises, saw lights flickering up here, she said, her tone shrill and accusing. Thought you needed help, Eleanor, but this? She waved a hand at Nathan and Sophie, her lips twisting. This stinks of trouble. And that, her gaze locked on the ledger, then the bracelet, a sly spark igniting. Victor's dirty laundry airing out at last? Eleanor's stomach churned. Margaret's nosiness was no secret, but this intrusion felt like a predator circling a fresh kill. Nathan moved forward, his voice smooth but laced with iron. You're drenched, Mrs. Pierce. Let's get you dried off before you catch a chill. He reached for her arm, but she recoiled, her camera swinging wildly. Keep your hands off me. I saw someone out there. Tall, quick, near the cliff. Thought it was you. She jabbed a finger at Nathan, her words a dart aimed to wound. Then that crash upstairs. I'm not blind. Sophie's laugh was a jagged edge, cutting through the room. You're the one barging in, playing shutterbug. What's your angle? Margaret's cheeks flushed, but she held her ground, her fingers white-knuckled around the camera. Eleanor's mind spun. The rain's patter a dull ache behind her eyes. Margaret's timing was too perfect, her accusations too pointed. Who was outside? She demanded, stepping closer, the ledger a shield against her chest. Margaret's eyes flicked to Nathan, then back, hesitating. A shadow gone before I could tell. But it wasn't the wind breaking things up there. Nathan chuckled, a low rumble that didn't match the tension in his shoulders. You've got a flair for drama. Should write for the papers instead of snapping pictures. His deflection grated, and Eleanor's patience frayed. The coded entries. Shadow drop, VC. Burning in her thoughts. Sophie's hand brushed her elbow, a warm, fleeting anchor that steadied her racing pulse. She's not wrong about the prowler, Sophie murmured, her breath close, her eyes locking with Eleanor's in a silent pact. Someone's testing us. The connection sparked, a current that made Eleanor's skin hum, but before she could respond, a flash seared the room. Margaret's camera, its shutter clicking as it captured them mid-confrontation, the ledger and bracelet stark in the frame. Proof, Margaret crowed, backing toward the door. Marble Cove needs to see this. Nathan lunged, his hand clamping her wrist, and the camera hit the floor with a sickening crunch, skidding across the wet marble. That's enough, he growled, his voice raw, his grip unrelenting as Margaret yelped, her arm twisting in his hold. Eleanor's stomach dropped, the violence sudden and unmasked. Sophie yanked him back, her strength a fierce counterpoint, and Margaret stumbled free, bolting into the rain without a backward glance, leaving the camera behind. Nathan stood there, chest heaving, his hands flexing as if unsure what they'd just done. He dragged a palm across his face, his expression hardening. Not remorse, but a cold calculation. His eyes darting to the broken device, then to the window where the cliff path vanished into shadow. She'll twist this, he said, his voice flat, devoid of apology, as if measuring the fallout. Sophie stepped between him and Eleanor, her shoulder brushing hers, a protective wall. She's already got plenty to twist, she said, her tone low and fierce. And you just gave her more. Eleanor knelt, lifting the camera, its cracked lens staring up like a blinded witness. The screen flickered, showing a blurry shot. Nathan's snarl, Sophie's defiance. The ledger's secrets caught mid-frame. Her fingers tightened around it, Victor's coded world. Unmarked crates, shadow drops, spilling into the present, a legacy she couldn't unsee. The rain's drone pressed against her skull, but it was the weight of Nathan's unyielding stare and Sophie's steady warmth that anchored her. Margaret's flight was a spark to dry tinder, and the prowler, real or imagined, lurked just beyond reach. What had Victor buried in those ships, and who was clawing it free? The night stretched taut, a thread ready to snap, and Eleanor felt the pull of answers she wasn't sure she wanted. Eleanor gripped the broken camera, its jagged edges biting into her palm, the frozen image on its screen. Nathan's bared teeth, Sophie's taut defiance, the ledger's damning pages, searing into her thoughts. The parlor's air thickened, the fire's last gasp spitting embers onto the hearth as rain drummed a staccato beat against the windows. Nathan stood rigid by the fireplace, his hands buried in his pockets, his gaze locked on the wet smear Margaret had left, a muscle ticking in his jaw. Sophie hovered near Eleanor, her shoulder a fleeting brush of heat against her arm, her green eyes flicking between Nathan and the door, alert and unyielding. The chandelier's crystals clinked overhead, a brittle sound swallowed by the room's swelling tension. Sophie's voice cut through, sharp and urgent. Margaret's running her mouth by now, spinning us into a circus. We've got to move. She snatched the silver bracelet from the table, the valor charm glinting like a taunt in her grasp. This ties to the logs. Someone's peeling back the layers, and she's their megaphone. Eleanor's fingers tightened on the camera, her jaw clenching as she watched the tiny ship sway. Victor's coded world, shadow drops, unmarked crates, loomed larger with every clue, a puzzle she was starting to piece together. each fragment a step closer to a truth she wasn't sure she could face. Nathan pivoted, his movements slow and coiled, his blue eyes catching the firelight with a predatory sheen. "Let her yap," he said, his voice a low growl, daring the room to challenge him. "She's got nothing solid, just a shaky photo and a loud mouth. Are real problems out there circling." He stepped forward, his shadow slicing across the rug, the faint tang of sweat cutting through his cedar scent. Sophie squared her shoulders, her stance a wall. "You're too cool about that prowler, Caldwell. Makes me wonder what you're not saying." His smirk flashed, cold and fleeting. "I don't jump at ghosts. Try it. It might steady your nerves." Eleanor dropped the camera onto the table with a sharp clack, her patience fraying. "I'm not waiting for Marble Cove to turn this into a witch hunt," she said, her tone clipped, decisive. "We need to know what Victor buried in those ships now." She tapped the ledger under her arm, its weight a tether to the questions clawing at her. Nathan's gaze darted to it, his hand flexing before disappearing into his pocket again. "Then we get out," he said, slinging his satchel over his shoulder. "A weekend away, somewhere quiet, no eyes. We sort it there." His words dripped with persuasion, but a raw edge lurked beneath, a hunger that set her teeth on edge. Sophie's laugh was a jagged slash. "A retreat? With a knife in your bag? You're delusional." She turned to Eleanor, her eyes blazing with a mix of fire and plea. "He's dodging, not solving. We stay, we dig." Nathan's mask slipped, his voice rising. "Dodging? I'm keeping this from exploding. You'd rather sit here for the next break-in?" Their words clashed, a storm within a storm, and Eleanor's hand shot up, silencing them. "I call the shots," she said, her voice ablade. "But I need facts, not guesses." A double knock rattled the front door, precise, deliberate, a chill sinking into her bones. Sophie darted to the entryway, her boots a swift echo, Nathan trailing with his satchel clutched tight, his stride too eager. Eleanor followed, the ledger pressed against her ribs, her pulse a steady thud. Sophie flung the door open, revealing a soaked envelope pinned to the stoop, the cliff path beyond a black void. She tore it open, her fingers deft, and thrust the paper at Eleanor, the typed words stark and wet. "The past sinks ships. Ask him." Her stomach lurched, her eyes snapping to Nathan, who stood frozen, his knuckles white on the strap, his gaze flicking to the darkness with a flicker of something raw, dread, or recognition. Sophie's voice was a hiss. "That's you, isn't it?" Nathan's face hardened, his reply a snarl. "Don't be absurd, it could be anyone. Victor, some old enemy." But his eyes betrayed him, darting too fast, and Sophie pressed closer, the note crumpling in her fist. "Enemies don't know you're here, unless you brought them." Eleanor's mind spun. The ledger's codes, VC, shadow drop, merging with this pointed jab, a thread she couldn't untangle. Headlights sliced through the gloom, a car's growl rumbling up the drive, and Sophie dropped the note, her hand grazing Eleanor's. A quick, electric anchor, before she peered out the window. "Margaret," she said, her voice tight, "and she's not alone." The car screeched to a stop, gravel crunching under its tires, and Margaret stumbled out, her raincoat flapping like a tattered flag. Two figures flanked her, hulking, broad-shouldered, their hoods pulled low, faces shadowed but eyes glinting with intent. She jabbed a finger at the house, her voice a shrill whip cutting through the wind. "They're in there, hiding it all." One stranger hefted a crowbar, its metal catching the headlight's glare, while the other cracked his knuckles, a slow, deliberate rhythm that promised violence. Nathan cursed, his hand diving into his satchel, pulling a pocket knife that flashed briefly before he tucked it away, his movements swift and cold. "We're not staying for this," he said, his tone icy final. "Coat Eleanor now." Sophie blocked his path, her body a shield, her eyes blazing. "You don't haul her off. Not with that blade." Her gaze flicked to Eleanor, fierce and searching, a silent vow shimmering beneath. Eleanor's chest tightened, caught between Nathan's steely command and Sophie's unyielding stand. the ledger a live wire against her skin. Margaret's shouts sharpened, boots grinding closer, the stranger's silhouettes growing larger, more defined, tools in hand, purpose in their stride. "Wait," Eleanor snapped, stepping forward, snatching the note from the floor, its words a brand in her mind. "We don't run. Not until I know." A rock crashed through the parlor window, glass exploding inward, shards skittering across the marble like shrapnel. Eleanor ducked, her arm shielding her face, the wind roaring in with a vengeance that swallowed Margaret's triumphant yell. Nathan lunged for the door, his knife glinting as he pocketed it, his face a mask of controlled fury. Sophie yanked Eleanor back, her grip iron tight, her breath a hot rush against her ear. "They're not here to talk. They're here to finish something." The headlights flared, bathing the room in harsh white, and Margaret's voice pierced the chaos. "No more secrets? Show them." The strangers advanced, the crowbar swinging lazily, a promise of ruin in its arc. Eleanor's vision narrowed, the note's taunt. "Ask him." A drumbeat in her skull, the ledger's weight a chain binding her to Victor's buried sins. Nathan's blade, Sophie's resolve, Margaret's vendetta. They closed in, a noose tightening with every step. The stranger's boots thudded on the stoop, their shadows clawing through the shattered window, and the door shuddered under a heavy fist, the lock groaning in protest. Eleanor's breath came fast, her hands trembling as she clutched the ledger, the realization sinking deep. She was cornered, the past crashing into the present with a force she couldn't outrun. Nathan's eyes met hers, dark and unyielding, Sophie's grip a lifeline she couldn't trust, and as the door buckled, splintering at the edges, she knew escape was a lie. Whatever Victor had hidden, it was here, now, and it wouldn't let her go. The front door splintered under a heavy blow, wood cracking like brittle bones as the stranger's boots thudded onto the parlor's marble floor. Eleanor stumbled back, the ledger slipping from her grasp and hitting the ground with a dull thud, its pages splaying open to reveal Victor's coded sins. Glass crunched beneath the intruder's soles, the shattered window letting in gusts of rain that stung her face like needles. Nathan stood poised near the hearth, his pocketknife now drawn, its blade a thin silver gleam in the flickering firelight, his jaw set in a grim line. Sophie yanked Eleanor behind her, her grip bruising as she shoved her toward the staircase, her voice a low growl. "Up now!" The air pulsed with chaos, Margaret's shrill cackle echoing from the stoop as she waved her arms, egging the men on like a conductor of madness. The taller of the two strangers stepped forward, his hood slipping just enough to reveal a jagged scar slicing across his cheek, his eyes cold and unblinking. He hefted the crowbar, its metal scarred and rusted, and swung it lazily, testing its weight. "Where's the rest of it?" he rasped, his voice gravelly, thick with a smoker's rasp. "We know he stashed more, hand it over." His partner, shorter but broader, cracked his knuckles again, the sound a wet snap that turned Eleanor's stomach. She froze mid-step, her hand clutching the banister, her mind racing to parse his words. More? More of what? The ledger's entries, unmarked crates, shadow drops, flashed in her thoughts, but this wasn't about paper. This was something tangible, something Victor had hidden. Nathan lunged, his knife slashing toward the scarred man, but the crowbar met it with a clang, sparks spitting as metal clashed. "Back off!" Nathan snarled, his stance low, predatory, but the stranger laughed, a guttural, mocking sound, and swung again, forcing Nathan to dodge, his satchel sliding to the floor. Sophie pushed Eleanor harder, her boots skidding on the wet marble as she dragged her up the stairs. "They're not here for us. They want something he left." Her words were a hiss, her eyes darting to the fallen ledger, then to Nathan, who parried another blow, his movements precise but frantic. Eleanor's legs trembled, but she climbed, the banisters cold would her anchor as Margaret's voice pierced the fray. "Get it all. Every last piece." The scarred man kicked Nathan's satchel aside, its contents spilling. Pens, a stethoscope, and a small, tarnished key that skittered across the floor, catching the light. Eleanor's breath hitched, her eyes locking on it. A key she'd seen before, years ago, dangling from Victor's belt as he'd locked his study safe, his smile tight when she'd asked what it guarded. Later, he'd said, brushing her off, and she'd let it go. Now it lay there, a glinting promise of answers, and the shorter stranger lunged for it, his thick fingers closing around it with a grunt of triumph. "Gotcha," he muttered, pocketing it as Nathan roared, tackling him into the sofa, the frame cracking under their weight. Sophie reached the landing, pulling Eleanor into the shadowed hallway, her chest heaving as she pressed her against the wall. "That key, he's had it all along," she whispered, her breath hot and ragged, her hands trembling as they gripped Eleanor's arms. "He knew what they're after, Victor's stash, whatever it is." Eleanor's mind reeled, the pieces snapping into place. Nathan's ease with the ledger, his quick deflections, the knife he wielded like second nature. Her voice came out raw, barely audible over the grunts and crashes below. He was Victor's doctor. How deep does this go? Sophie's eyes widened, then narrowed, a spark of realization igniting. Deep enough to kill for. A scream ripped through the house. Not Margaret's, but Nathan's, sharp and guttural, followed by a heavy thud. Eleanor broke free, peering over the railing, her stomach plummeting. Nathan lay sprawled near the hearth, blood seeping from a gash on his forehead. The scarred man looming over him, crowbar raised. The shorter one rummaged through the satchel, tossing aside papers, his curses growing louder. "It's not here. Where's the rest?" Margaret darted inside, her raincoat dripping, her face alight with manic glee. "Check upstairs. The safe. He always kept it locked." Her finger stabbed toward the study, and the scarred man's head snapped up, his gaze locking on the staircase, on Eleanor. Sophie yanked her back, shoving her toward the study door. "Move. They'll tear this place apart." Eleanor stumbled inside, the room's shadows swallowing her as Sophie slammed the door, wedging a chair under the knob. The desk loomed ahead, its hidden safe a dark slit beneath the bottom drawer. Victor's sanctuary, untouched since his death. Eleanor dropped to her knees, her fingers fumbling with the drawer, pulling it free to reveal the small, steel box, its lock gleaming dully. "The key," she rasped, her voice shaking as footsteps pounded up the stairs, the chair rattling under a heavy blow. Sophie knelt beside her, her hands steadying Eleanor's. "Nathan's got it, or they do now. We're out of time." The door shuddered, wood groaning as the scarred man's voice barked through it. "Open it, or we break it down, your choice." Eleanor's heart slammed against her ribs, her fingers tracing the safe's edges, the cold metal a stark contrast to the heat of Sophie's touch. She remembered Victor's late nights here, the clink of that key, the way he'd glance at her with a mix of pride and something darker. Guilt, maybe, or fear. "What's in there?" Sophie whispered, her voice tight, her eyes searching Eleanor's face. "What did he leave you?" Eleanor shook her head, her throat closing. "I don't know, but they do." A crash echoed below, glass shattering again, and Margaret's laugh rang out, high and unhinged. "Found something, keep." Sophie spun toward the noise, her grip loosening as a new sound joined the chaos. A low, guttural groan, Nathan stirring on the floor below. The door buckled further, splinters flying as the crowbar wedged through. The scarred man's scarred face pressing against the gap, his teeth bared. "Time's up, ladies." Eleanor's gaze darted to the safe, then to Sophie, whose hand tightened on her arm, her breath coming fast. The chair slid an inch, the lock trembling, and Nathan's voice croaked from below, weak but defiant. "Don't let them." The words cut off, drowned by a heavy thud, and the scarred man roared, the crowbar tearing deeper. Eleanor's fingers dug into the carpet, her mind racing. Victor's secrets, the key, the safe, all converging here, now with no way out. Sophie's eyes met hers, fierce and unwavering, a silent vow amidst the storm. The door gave another groan, the chair tipping, and the scarred man's arm thrust through, groping for the knob. Eleanor's breath stopped, the safe's lock a taunting barrier. The answers locked inside a heartbeat away from exposure or destruction. The house shook with their fury, and as the door began to give, a single question burned through the chaos. What had Victor hidden that was worth this bloodshed, and could she face it before it claimed them all? The study door buckled under the scarred man's relentless assault, the crowbar tearing through wood like a beast clawing its prey, splinters raining onto the carpet. Eleanor knelt before the safe, her fingers trembling as they traced its cold steel edges, the lock a mocking barrier between her and Victor's buried truth. Sophie braced the chair against the knob, her boots skidding on the hardwood as the frame shuddered, her breath ragged with effort. The scarred man's arm thrust through the widening gap, his thick fingers groping for the latch, his guttural snarl filling the room. "Give it up now." Downstairs, Nathan's groan rose again, weaker this time, a thread of defiance fraying under the weight of his wounds. The air pulsed with violence, the rain staccato against the roof, a relentless drumbeat driving the chaos forward. Sophie's eyes locked on Eleanor's, wide and fierce, her voice cutting through the din. "We can't hold them. Open it or they will." Eleanor's chest heaved, her nails digging into the carpet as she fumbled with the safe, the keyless lock a cruel taunt. She pictured Victor here, his broad shoulders hunched over this very spot, the clink of that tarnished key a nightly ritual she dismissed as routine. Now it was gone, snatched by the stranger below, and with it her last shield. The chair tipped, its legs scraping as Sophie threw her weight against it, her shoulders slamming into the door with a grunt. The scarred man's crowbar wedged deeper, the gap splitting wide, and his scarred face pressed through, eyes glinting with a hunger that turned Eleanor's stomach. A sharp crack echoed from below, glass crunching underfoot, followed by Margaret's high-pitched shriek. "He's got it! Check him!" Footsteps pounded, heavy and uneven, and Eleanor's head snapped up, her pulse hammering as she strained to hear. Nathan's voice rasped out, faint but venomous. "You'll regret this." A thud followed, a body hitting the floor, and the shorter stranger's growl rose above the fray. "Where's the damn map? It's not here." Eleanor's mind raced, the key, the ledger, now a map? Victor's secrets unraveled faster than she could grasp, each thread a noose tightening around her throat. The door gave a final groan, the chair tumbling as the scarred man shoved through, his crowbar swinging free, rust flaking onto the floor. Sophie lunged, tackling him mid-stride, her arms wrapping around his legs in a desperate bid to slow him. He roared, kicking her off with a vicious twist, and she hit the desk, the edge catching her ribs with a sickening crack. Eleanor scrambled to her feet, her hands fumbling for anything. A lamp, a book. But the second blow came faster, the crowbar arcing toward Sophie's head. Instinct took over. Eleanor threw herself forward, shoving Sophie aside, the metal grazing her shoulder instead. A searing pain that ripped a cry from her lips. The scarred man spun on her, his breath hot and sour as he loomed close, the crowbar raised again. "Where's the stash? Tell me or she's next." His free hand clamped her arm, bruising her skin, and Eleanor's vision blurred, the safe's dark slit mocking her from the floor. Sophie coughed, clutching her side, her eyes blazing through the pain. Don't give him anything," she rasped, blood trickling from her lip where she'd bitten it. Eleanor's heart pounded, torn between defiance and the cold reality of the weapon hovering inches from her face. A shout from downstairs broke the standoff. Margaret's voice, shrill and panicked. "He's moving! Stop him!" The scarred man hesitated, his grip loosening as he glanced toward the stairs, and Eleanor seized the moment, wrenching free and diving for the safe. Her fingers found a seam, a hidden catch Victor had once brushed against by accident, her nails prying it open with a faint click. The lid sprang up, revealing a leather pouch, its surface worn and stained, a folded parchment tucked inside. She yanked it out, the paper crackling as she unfolded it. A map, hand-drawn, its edges yellowed, marked with a jagged X along the cliff's base, labeled Valor's Rest. Her breath caught. The Valor hadn't just been a ship, it was a grave. The scarred man lunged, snatching the map from her hands, his crowbar clattering to the floor as he studied it, a grin splitting his scarred face. "Jackpot," he muttered, shoving it into his coat. Sophie staggered up, her arm swinging a heavy book at his head, but he ducked, backhanding her across the cheek with a force that sent her sprawling. Eleanor's scream lodged in her throat as the shorter stranger barreled into the room, the tarnished key dangling from his fist, his eyes wild. "Downstairs now," he barked, and the scarred man nodded, dragging Eleanor toward the door, his grip a vice on her wrist. They stumbled down the stairs, Sophie's pained gasps trailing behind as the shorter man hauled her along, her boots dragging on the steps. The parlor was a wreckage. Furniture overturned, the hearth smeared with blood where Nathan lay slumped, his chest rising shallowly, his knife gone. Margaret stood by the broken window, her raincoat flapping, her face alight with a twisted triumph. "Told you. Victor's dirty little hoard. Knew it was real." The scarred man shoved Eleanor forward, the map clutched in his hand as he barked at his partner. "Get the gear, we're heading to the cliffs." Eleanor's knees hit the marble, her shoulder throbbing, her gaze locking on Nathan's bloodied form. His eyes fluttered open, meeting hers, a flicker of something, regret, maybe, passing through them. "I tried to stop it," he croaked, his voice a thread, his hand twitching toward his satchel, now empty. The shorter stranger kicked it aside, the key glinting as he tossed it to Margaret, who caught it with a gleeful cackle. "You were in on it, Doc. Don't play saint now." Eleanor's stomach dropped, the pieces slamming together. Nathan's knowledge of the ledger, his knife, his calm that masked a deeper game. He'd known Victor's secret, played his part, and now it was unraveling in blood and betrayal. The scarred man yanked her up, shoving her toward the door, the map a crumpled flag of victory in his grip. Sophie lunged again, weaker now, her fist glancing off his arm, and he threw her down, her head cracking against the floor with a sound that stopped Eleanor's heart. "Enough!" she screamed, twisting in his hold, her nails raking his scarred cheek, drawing blood. He snarled, slamming her against the wall, the breath rushing from her lungs as stars burst behind her eyes. "Move or she's dead," he hissed, nodding at Sophie's still form, and Eleanor's resistance crumbled, her body sagging as he dragged her outside. The cliff path loomed ahead, rain-slick and treacherous, the ocean's roar a deafening howl below. The strangers hauled her toward the edge, the X on the map guiding them to a narrow crevice carved into the rock, its mouth barely visible in the dark. The scarred man shoved her forward, his crowbar back in hand, prying at a rusted panel hidden beneath vines. It gave with a groan, revealing a damp, steel crate, Victor's hoard, untouched for years, its lid stamped with Grayson shipping. He tore it open, spilling gold coins, bundled cash, and a single, sealed vial, cloudy, ominous, a relic of deals darker than she'd imagined. "Smuggler's jackpot," he muttered, pocketing the vial as his partner scooped the rest. Eleanor's knees buckled, the rain washing blood and tears from her face as the truth sank in. Victor's empire, her life with him, built on this filth. The scarred man turned, his grin feral, and raised the crowbar, its rust flaking onto her soaked blouse. "No witnesses," he said, and time slowed, the metal arcing toward her skull. A gunshot cracked the night, sharp and final, and he crumpled, blood blooming from his chest, the crowbar clattering down the rocks. The shorter stranger spun, his hands fumbling for a weapon, but another shot dropped him, his body slumping into the crate. Eleanor whirled, her vision swimming, and saw Sophie staggering from the house, a pistol trembling in her bloodied hands, her face pale but resolute. She collapsed beside Eleanor, the gun slipping to the ground, her breath a ragged sob. "Couldn't let them," she gasped, her hand finding Eleanor's, their fingers locking tight. Margaret's wail rose from the parlor, a broken sound swallowed by the wind as sirens wailed in the distance, faint but growing. Nathan's fate hung unanswered, his blood pooling inside, but Eleanor couldn't look back, only forward, at the woman who'd saved her, and the wreckage of a life she'd never truly known. They sat there, rain-soaked and shattered, the cliff's edge a silent witness as the ocean churned below, washing away the gold, the lies, the years. Victor's love had been a gilded cage, his secrets a poison that had claimed them all in the end. Eleanor squeezed Sophie's hand, her voice a whisper lost to the wind. Too much trust. The lights of Marble Cove flickered closer, justice or judgment bearing down. And as the waves swallowed the last of the crate, she wondered if freedom was worth this cost. A question etched in the salt and blood they'd leave behind.